gold isn't the salvation. Cryptos is no salvation. What did Roosevelt do? First thing he did was take the gold from the American people, confiscated the gold.
Please join us for our next live stream, Sunday, September 26th at 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll go over current events, past guests, and of course, gold and silver news. Once again, our next live stream will be Sunday, September 26th, 9 p.m. Eastern. See you then. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Silver Bullion Television, SBTV. I'm your host, Patrick Vieira. As always, if you're new to our channel or if you haven't already done so, please do subscribe, hit the bell to be notified on updates, and give us a thumbs up if you like what we do. We truly do appreciate your support. Dr. Ron Paul joins us again today, an American author, activist, physician, and retired politician who served as the U.S. representative for 2 Texas congressional districts and on 3 occasions sought the presidency of the United States. Dr. Paul can now be found on the Ron Paul Liberty Report and the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. We all know him very well. It's time to saddle up and silver up for Dr. Ron Paul. Dr. Paul, welcome back to SBTV. How are you doing?
Good, except for those people in Washington and the Federal Reserve. They don't know what we're talking about.
No, they don't. Sometimes I wonder about that.
Yeah.
Dr. Paul, it's the 20th year of the anniversary of 9/11. Can you share with us where you were and what you were doing at the time when the event happened?
Well, I remember it very clearly, like everybody that was aware of what was happening on that day. I was at my condo in Virginia, and I was getting ready to go to the office, to the congressional office. But I had the business station on, and I always say that if you want to hear about big news quickly, it's not to be on a news station as much as your financial statement, because it reacts very, very rapidly. And of course, the markets were closed and there was chaos, and then everybody was covering the news. But the news was there, and I continued to get ready, trying to figure out what was going on. But I did get a call from my congressional office, and the individual say, "Don't come, don't come." So information was pouring out. I think that was I don't even know if this plane had gone into the Pentagon or not. But anyway, the information came to me in that fashion, and then it was enough to, literally change the world. At least it changed Washington, D.C. And unfortunately, some of the bad effects from 9/11 are still with us. We still punish the American people for it by immediately passing the Patriot Act. And that was something I talked about. I remember talking to somebody, and I said, this is going to make our job on protecting liberty and balanced budget and being a non-interventionist foreign policy much, much more difficult. And it certainly has. And the civil liberties thing has probably been actually even worse, because the effects of 9/11 has combined with the outrageous effects of COVID. So the American people's civil liberties have been undermined ever since.
Dr. Paul, but when you did make your way to Congress, what was the atmosphere like?
Well, I think it was mostly unknowing, because I would say the next several days, I don't know how many days we were out, but the whole thing was trying to get home. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it was on a Tuesday, and by Friday, we were trying to get out, and we always flew out of National, right downtown, and that was all closed. And so I made a trip out to Baltimore, and after many, many hours, it was probably a 15-hour day, but I finally got back to Lake Jackson. So it took a while after that. And when we went back into session, unfortunately, it was just mostly dealing with the assessment: who was killed, what was happening, and what was going on, and then there was some security briefings that we would have. But unfortunately, it was a very, very sad day, but it was also a very threatening day. And the people in Congress didn't know a whole lot more about it than the people who were watching television.
Dr. Paul, as a result from 9/11, We went into Iraq. We went after a Libyan leader. We went into Afghanistan, and I'll be as sensitive as I can to our fallen service members and their families, and our love goes out to them, of course. But were these events justifiable? Where, by almost all accounts, the question left to be answered is, what really did the country gain?
Well, what we did was, it was justifiable to do something. I mean, it was a major tragedy, and even if it was a reflection of our mistakes, at that point, when there's been so much destruction, you have to do what you can to contain it, stop it, or find out exactly what went on. But what happened, though, which is traditional so often, they take these emergencies and turn them around for other reasons, for reasons of benefiting the state. So the first thing that they did was there was an authority to use military action, military force, to go after the people responsible. But which I supported. You know, if you know who did this, and it's still up in the air, and they may be another week away from another one, I was supportive of that. But I was never supportive of what they did, because the first thing was, it was Saddam Hussein. He did everything. It was Saddam Hussein, and there was so much propagandizing about how we had to blame Iraq. So it was the excuse to do what they wanted to do, just as it was, and that was 2001. Then by 2002, they shifted and added on to it was this massive invasion of Afghanistan. But there was always other reasons for doing this. It got to the point where hardly anything was designed because we were going to capture the terrorists. Matter of fact, the terrorists who did it, most they were killed. But to find out what was going on, I just don't think there was a very strong effort to that, and there was much more interested in doing the things to embolden our empire to move along. We were and have been and still remain a powerful nation. We had the reserve currency of the world. We had all the military, and we had an interest in oil. We had already made deals with Saudi Arabia about fixing the price of oil for us. At the same time, at the same time, we would provide the defense for them. And so we've been very, very much involved in the Middle East. So this was emboldening the neoconservatives who wanted to increase it, just like what's going on today. The desires are still there in spite of this whole thing of us getting out of Afghanistan, which I don't happen to buy into. It's different, and people, I think the American people would like to see us get out of it. But most of the time, these emergencies like this, whether it's 9/11 or COVID or whatever, is used to enhance the state. And it's the neoconservatives supported by a neoconservative idea on the far left, too. So if you were a libertarian, conservative, constitutional, non-interventionist, there wasn't a whole lot of support, because then you would be accused of being unpatriotic, which I was, of course, during the presidential race, and holy man, you didn't support the troops and all that nonsense that went on. But it turned out that most people realize now that all that killing, the whole thing since 9/11, it's over $8 trillion that they can identify that they spent over there, and $2 trillion just in Afghanistan. And some people ask me, did this make us any safer? No, it made us poorer, made us less safe, it made us less free. And the most disgusting argument for all the troops that go over there and they get injured and wounded and get killed, and we thank them for their service to protect our Constitution and our freedoms. I have a little trouble with that statement. I think going to war without the proper authority, with a declaration of war, is hardly defending the Constitution. And certainly we never become more free under those circumstances. We became less free after 9/11, and we have become less free after the COVID deal, and less free all the time. I mean, I sense there's a lot of stirrings, and there's there's a pushback now, fortunately, for people who are sick and tired of all the nonsense going on with overdoing this whole lockdown deal and regulating and talking about vaccine passports. But in spite of all the negatives, there's a lot of positive. I just hope the demonstrations against this nonsense keep growing. And I'm very, very encouraged by the fact that even in France, they're having tens of thousands of people turning up. Enough is enough. And they're starting to see the difference about what big government does. And libertarian, of course, has a natural instinct to not put a whole lot of confidence in big government and see big government as the underminer of our liberties, and certainly not promoters of peace. Because in my lifetime, if I remember World War II, especially after World War II, think of all the things that have gone on. No law, no declaration of war. We spend all this money, and you're still we're hanging on to that currency, the dollar, as the reserve currency of the world, because it provides so many benefits to us. It gives us license to spend and license to waste and control, and but it's getting a little bit shaky, and I think that's what the big news right now is. How shaky is it, and how distorted is the economy due to these tens of trillions of dollars of dollars and credits created out of thin air? A lot of debt, and a lot of malinvestment, and a lot of distortion of wealth distribution. So what it has, the conclusion that we're coming to, and people have to realize, it is a creature of a monetary policy which makes no sense whatsoever, and it has allowed our government to overextend at the expense of freedom.
Yeah, a lot of great points there. Dr. Paul, why, in your opinion, does it seem that our military is never really at peace, never at ease? I mean, who or what, from the time you spent in Congress, do you see as America's biggest threat?
I think it's our domestic philosophies. I think it's our universities. I think it's attack on liberties. We certainly see it more than ever with COVID, and why the business community has capitulated, why there's an alliance between big business, big banks, and also the people who are suffering, the consequences of this being used. And so there is this alliance between big business and the announced people. There's an announced movement in this country that you can be a cultural Marxist and still go to Congress, So I see that as our greatest threat. I think all this other stuff that China's going to invade us and things like that, we should be strong and we should be defending ourselves. But we don't need to do it. I thought the greatest event of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet system and coming down of the Berlin Wall. And I saw this as a tremendous benefit, and it has been a tremendous benefit, but I also was worried about what was going to replace it, and unfortunately it wasn't the libertarian message of free markets and sound money. It was interventionism, deficit financing, and central banking, the American empire, and that is what has prevailed. So that is what I see as the enemy, because it does, in order to maintain an empire, you have to be prepared and get involved in so many military conflicts. So like now we're in Syria, and we just finally got out of Syria. Oh yeah, except we left a few thousand there to protect our oil. And I think something like that will probably happen in Afghanistan. There's too much wealth sitting around in Afghanistan that we're not going to sit back and not have an influence. So you were talking about our enemies, and part of this system that I complain about is also managed, by a lot of secrecy, and the CIA very much involved, are able to, spread the influence, and they've been involved, We have trouble understanding. A lot of people have trouble understanding. Do we have honest elections in this country? Don't we need to do something about it? And then everybody's pontificating about it. And then when we think, How many elections have we been involved in the last 50 years, starting, let's say, with 1953 when we were participant in a coup in Iran. So the hypocrisy of it is a big bugaboo. But and the other reason to avoid saying, well, the biggest threat is China, therefore we have to go attack them and do this kind of thing, is that what we have moral and legal responsibility for, especially if you're in a Congress, that it is to deal with our problems. So if somebody else is violating civil liberties around the world, yeah, we can make a statement, say, they shouldn't do that. But we can't send the troops in there, especially if we're doing something equally bad in our own countries, because when we become perfect, then I think we can lecture other people, but that's not likely to happen. I think the best way, because we do have a lot of goodness, and we've had a good productive activity in this country, and we've had a maximum amount of freedom compared to others. But if we really believed in that, the best way to spread that message is what I believe in, is that we try to change ourselves and set an example. And we have over the years. There were times when people say, and there's still a lot of people believing that we are the best. We want to come here and we're are going to be free and prosperous, but there's a lot of confusion on that. But I think if we want to change the world, we don't do it with military fight or intimidation or sanctions or trade barriers or all of that. We want to have a free society, and I like trade and I like communications among all nations, and not using force and violence to try to have it our way.
Amen to that. Dr. Paul, would you label the Federal Reserve as a threat?
Well, the philosophy of the Federal Reserve is a threat, and so yes, they're a threat. And Thomas Jefferson taught me that. He says, don't have central banking. And we know that one of the major issues of the Communist Manifesto was central banking. And of course, it's tempting that all nations over the centuries have been, yes, they know about sound money. They even know the biblical support for honest weights and measures. But there's always individuals who abuse it, because you can build big government by artificially creating money and being counterfeiters. They should be all arrested for fraud. And the founders felt strongly about this. They said if you counterfeit government papers, important papers, you should get the death penalty, or you could get the death penalty. So the concept is what is wrong, because you could have some of these bad features. You might have one of the Marxists say, well, we need to get rid of the Fed and sound like an ally, but then they want to be the Fed. They want modern monetary theory. They figure the Fed doesn't distribute the money fairly enough, so they might argue that the case for that. But no, the Fed should be audited. When the people in this country found out how bad it is, then they're going to say, why are we doing this? It's causing so much harm. It's caused this maldistribution. It's wiped out the middle class, and it's helped the very wealthy. Oh, so that would be a lot of ammunition for getting rid of the Fed, and that, of course, is what I support.
Okay, Dr. Paul. I mean, I know we've touched on this, and you've constantly said this as well, end the Fed. But how do we really truly end the Fed?
Well, I don't think you have to worry about that. I think the Fed will, in a technical way, end itself. It's going to hang around, and it's going to print money like they're doing, and they're going to accommodate anybody and everybody. I think they might even be surprised that they're getting away with what they're doing, because, for a good many years, they always figure, well, we can get away with it a while, and then when it looks like there's price inflation coming, we're going to have to back off, like they did in the 70s, and Volcker comes in and said, bite the bullet, you got to cut some spending, you got to have some deficits funding, and all these things. So it's right now, though, we've gone since '08, essentially, with quantitative easing, that there are no limits. And it surprises me a little bit that it's actually still functioning. People still trust the dollar because there's not much else to other option. Some people think it'll be found in cryptocurrencies. Other people believe that eventually they will have to revert and go back to sound money, like we did in 1875 after the Civil War. We went back and it was a non-event. It's not likely to happen now, but it's something that on monetary policy. It should not be in the hands of secrecy, people in secret. That's why the Federal Reserve should be eliminated. But more importantly, we probably need a lot more education in our universities, because if you go to 90-some% of our universities today owned by the government, and who also get support indirectly, from the Federal Reserve itself, because they get all these papers, all these economic papers out of the universities defending the Federal Reserve. So it's a system that will self-destruct, even though I believe that there are quite a few people who are surprised that this even works the way they do. Negative interest rates, yeah, I believe they're negative, because if you factor in real inflation rate and you have interest rates at 1%, they're negative. And that is not the way to run an economy. It doesn't work. And the worse condition it gets, the more it encouraged people to keep making the same mistake. So when COVID came along, just think of the trillions of dollars, probably injected $6 trillion, to salvage that. And people still trust the money, and people take their money, they get their check, and they go out. But now they're getting a little annoyed because standard of living is going down and the cost of living is going up. So it's going to end with a calamity, and then the Federal Reserve will become irrelevant, and hopefully we will have the wisdom of a Thomas Jefferson to say no central banking and get rid of the Hamiltonians.
Okay. Dr. Paul, when other countries get into currency issues, they typically seek shelter by moving from their local currency to the U.S. dollar as a safe haven. However, should the U.S. dollar inflate or hyperinflate, I suspect it will not be easy for our countrymen in the U.S. or in the U.S. borders to move to any other currency. Are these compelling reasons to own some gold, own some silver, or even perhaps own some crypto, as we just touched on?
Yeah, it's not difficult to figure out. They have that which you suggest has been a necessity for a long time. That's when I really got involved in monetary policy in the 60s. I was interested and read about it and looked at all the predictions of what would happen, and Bretton Woods broke down because they were abusing the standard. They were in price fixing, and the world loved it, and they said, yes, as long as the United States takes care of us and has a military and will defend us, we'll go along with this. So they did this, but it lasted, up until 1971. There was a fixed ratio between the gold and silver. Gold and the dollar, but I don't think there's likelihood that there's going to be another currency that people will also always gravitate to. They talk about others, even China having a currency. I just think psychologically and politically that's not likely to happen. So I think that ultimately it will be, a lot of people will go to gold and silver, and some people argue, well, no, crypto is going to protect us. But, when I look at this, I see a lot of shortcomings of cryptocurrencies and even gold and silver. What did Roosevelt do when he had a calamity of our depression as a consequence of the inflation by the Federal Reserve for World War I? The first thing he did was take the gold from the American people, confiscated the gold. So the gold isn't the salvation. Cryptos is no salvation, and the only thing that really will protect us against an evil government is the freedom by the people to take care of themselves, and acknowledgement that liberty is what we need, and that will take care of things. So you don't, under those conditions, you don't have a Federal Reserve. You have honesty and money, and you will have monetary authorities, and you'll still have government, but you would have you would have to live within our means. You wouldn't be able to print money because that's fraud, and that's where the problem came from. So if people go through another crisis and say, well, it looks like things are calmed down, we can go back to printing money again. That would be very, very bad. That's what we have done for all these years, and it worked to a degree, but it hasn't worked in these last 10 and 15 years. Even since '08, and especially with COVID, it seems to be working, but I don't trust it. I think that there's not going to be an easy way to find another currency. But in the meantime, protect our liberties is important, and then have enough freedom that you can protect yourself physically and economically speaking, and protect your own civil liberties and your right of free speech. The people have to have that. That would be the most important thing. But I think in the meantime, in 1971, when I realized what was happening, we weren't even allowed to own gold, but we were able to buy numismatic gold, and that's when I started buying gold. And of course, silver always fascinated me because as a kid, I always saved the silver coinage and stuck it in the books and looked at them because I would deliver newspapers and milk and things like that. So we dealt a lot in change. And I think it was around $1.29 when it hit that. It paid to melt it, which was in the mid 60s. And in 65, after that, the silver disappeared. And for some reason, I don't know how it happened, but I don't think we have a market price for silver right now. There seems like there are some pretty good arguments why, if it was a totally free market, silver prices would be a lot higher. But anyway, I still like silver. I think one of my most favorite silver coins is the newly minted silver 1 ounce of the silver dollar, because it's recognizable and it is true silver. It's one of the things the government has done to issue it, and it's popular. So I think having those at hand is very important. Matter of fact, because I strongly believed in it, that was one way that I taught my kids lessons. Is I would, on routine occasions, whether it would be birthdays or Christmas time or whatever, I would give them silver coins, and they all understand silver, they understand gold, they understand sound money, and they understand all the other reasons why we should have limitation on the Federal Reserve and get rid of it.
So many interesting stories. I could chat with you all day, Dr. Paul, but I know we gotta let you head on out. So, Dr. Paul, we appreciate the time you've given, and we appreciate the service that you've given, and I hope we can do this again soon.
Very good. It was a delight to be with you today. Thank you.
That was Dr. Ron Paul sharing his views and experiences as only he can. To see more of Dr. Paul's work, please visit www.ronpaullibertyreport.com and at Ron Paul on Twitter. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the SBTV channel. Audio-only versions can be found on iTunes and Spotify.